Here's Frank Turek to make some arguments for God that have already been debunked to his face.
What evidence outside of the Bible do we have that God exists? So excuse me, guys, we're going to start off with the questions about God first. So, all right, I know your Bible says that God exists, but I don't believe in your Bible. So therefore, Mr. Christian,
yeah, good.
Where do you go from there?
I'm sorry, but every pair of glasses Frank wears looks like a pair of safety goggles. He looks like a middle school woodshop teacher who's about to show me how to use the bandsaw.
That's great. Yeah, and what we do on a college campus, we talk about, that's one of the big questions we talk about, does God exist? And I normally talk about three arguments for God, or three pieces of evidence for God. The first is that the universe had a beginning, Alan, that there was a beginning to space, time, and matter. And even atheists admit this. I mean, even Stephen Hawking, who was the top physicist in the world until he died about 4 years ago, said this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang.
If that's the case, the Big Bang could not have had a cause. If it was the very first moment in time, then it could not have had a cause, because you can't cause an event to occur at a time when it's already occurring. If there had been a time before the Big Bang occurred, then one could coherently speculate that it had a cause, but in that case, it would not have been creation out of nothing, because time would have already existed.
In other words, there was a starting point for space, time, and matter. And so this is not even controversial anymore. People are admitting this. The only thing that's controversial, Alan, is what caused the beginning, right?
This should not be controversial, given that the idea that space-time had a cause is incoherent for reasons I already explained. You can't cause something to occur at a time when it's already occurring. It's too late by then.
And so it seems to me that if space, time, and matter had a beginning, then whatever created space, time, and matter can't be made of space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must transcend space, time, and matter.
In other words, it must exist nowhere and never. Frank doesn't seem to realize that this is the same as saying it doesn't exist.
So the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial.
In other words, it must lack every single prerequisite for existence.
Powerful to create the universe out of nothing. Personal in order to choose to create. You might say, well, why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. You know, impersonal forces don't make choices. Gravity doesn't decide to pull something to the ground, right? It just does it.
You can't go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation because nothingness is not a state. And since there was never a time when time did not exist, there was never a time when nothing existed. And Frank seems to think that choices are the only kind of non-deterministic events. There's no evidence that choices are non-deterministic, but even if they were, choices would not be the only events that occur without cause. Physical things can act non-deterministically sometimes.
So the cause of the universe has to be personal. The cause would also have to be intelligent, to have a mind in order to make a choice. So I always ask people this question, Alan. I say, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of?
I'm as able to think of such a thing as I am able to think of a square circle or a married bachelor. A timeless, spaceless being is a self-contradictory notion.
People will say God. And then they'll say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God? And my answer is, we don't. Yet. We haven't done enough research yet. I mean, at this point, the creator of the universe could be Allah. But how do we discover if this is Allah or the Christian God?
Well, Muslims conceive of Allah as being the God of Abraham, and Christians see their God as being the God of Abraham. So this is a questionable distinction.
What we need to do is see the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. And if we look at that evidence, I think we'll realize that Jesus rose from the dead, which means that the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being in whose human nature walked out of the tomb 1,986 years ago.
So the God that created the universe is the Christian God because Jesus rose from the dead? Do I have to show the Hitchens clip again? I'm going to show the Hitchens clip again.
Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet people. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
Even if you could prove that Jesus rose from the dead, that absolutely would not prove that Jesus is God incarnate.
Right? So, in other words, it is the Christian God, but you don't know it just from what we call the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe. The second and third arguments, the second argument is the argument from the design of the universe, that if the universe were slightly different by any one of a number of factors, virtually imperceptibly, Alan, this is called the fine-tuning of the universe, there would be no universe, or there would be no universe that could support life.
The ironic thing about the argument that life would be impossible in a universe that is even slightly different is because if an all-powerful God exists, it isn't true. If an all-powerful God exists, then that God would have the power to put life into a universe with any set of parameters. No fine-tuning would be necessary. In fact, if we lived in a universe with a set of constants under which the natural development of life were impossible, that would be much greater evidence, in fact it would be outright proof, that the presence of life is not a natural phenomenon. The fact that the universe has a set of parameters that allows the natural development of life shows that divine intervention was not necessary.
So the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life to exist and even for chemistry to work.
So,
and then the third argument is the
when
argument
you say fine-tuning, do you mean like if the sun is like the distance from the sun to the earth, like if it was further away, or like it has to, it's perfect now, and if something was out of alignment, that we wouldn't.
That's part of it, but even from the beginning, let me just give you one fact on this, because this is hard to believe. But Hawking, the atheist, put it this way. He said that if the expansion rate of the universe were different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies.
Wow, that would be a remarkable coincidence if there were any reason to believe that such a parameter were even free to vary in the first place.
In other words, if the expansion rate at the very beginning was imperceptibly different virtually than it is now, we wouldn't be here. Now, what caused that expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be? Seems to me the same being that created space, time, and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate so we could be here today.
Why would an all-powerful being be hamstrung by an expansion rate? Does he not have the power to keep the universe from collapsing without that expansion rate?
So from the very beginning, the universe is fine-tuned, which means you can't say, well, by chance it evolved. No. This is how the expansion rate began at the creation point. And if it were different then or different now, we wouldn't be here.
If it's true that the expansion rate has never varied, what reason is there to believe that it ever could have varied?
So part of what you said is true, but even from the very beginning, it's true. So the fine-tuning shows also that the creator has to be a very intelligent and powerful being in order to fine-tune the universe to be as fine-tuned as it is.
But apparently not powerful enough to put us into a universe that is not finely tuned.
And that's just one of about a dozen different things that you can look at and say, if any one of those were imperceptibly different, we wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And
the third.
Yep.
Yeah, the third argument is the moral argument. And the moral argument says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no God, then everything's just a matter of opinion.
Even if there is a God, everything is still a matter of opinion. The fact that one opinion is God's opinion doesn't make that opinion any more objective, because there is no objective, non-circular reason why we ought to do what God says. If all morality is whatever is consistent with God's commands or God's nature, then the only defense of the moral principle that you ought to do what God says is that God says to. I know the idea that morality is a matter of opinion is scary to some people because opinions can be ephemeral, but there is nothing that can make me tolerate acts that are intolerable to my conscience. There is something that can make literally any act tolerable to Frank, though. All you have to do is convince him that God has commanded it.
That would be just your opinion against a baby's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion. But we all know, Alan, those things aren't just a matter of opinion, that it's really wrong to torture babies for fun. It's really wrong to people.
According to Frank's worldview, these things are not wrong per se. They're only wrong if you do them without God's permission. If you ask him why God ordered Canaanite children to be unalived, he'll say essentially that it's not wrong if God commands it. God commanding this never made sense to me, because if God is all-powerful, and even if there were a legitimate reason to eliminate the Canaanites, why did he send the Israelites to do it with swords and clubs instead of just making them all painlessly vanish? God could have just made the Canaanites all go poof and disappear. Why would that not have been better if God really loves everyone? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.